State delivers their closing, the defense delivers theirs, and then they get a chance, the state does, for a rebuttal argument. That's what we just saw. And they're, again, pointing this jury to that timeline, putting a lot of faith in that timeline. Let me bring in my guest for this hour. Federal trial attorney Alexis Rosenberg is with me. Alexis, great to see you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
All right, so let me start off by just getting a general thought from you. My idea was closings were extremely important in this case. And I say that because there were a lot of disparate pieces, a lot of little things here and there that needed to be brought together for really the state to get a conviction here. They needed to tie it up into a nice little package or put that puzzle together, however you want to put it. I think they were able to do that. I'm not so sure I'm still along for the ride, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
I mean, I think they have a difficult case here because, like you said, there's a lot of little pieces, and they really are asking you to put all those pieces together for this conviction. There really are. I mean, the defense attorney in her closing was very good at saying, what are the unanswered questions? And there really are. I mean, why he did this, there's a lot, and the prosecution kind of wants you to disregard that and just go with, what they're saying. But there's a lot of unanswered questions still, even though we've now heard closing.
When I boil this case down, Alexis, and I think about what's important, I think ultimately it boils down to, will this jury think this was a staged suicide? Because if they believe it was a staged suicide, then all the other things that the state's talking about falls into place and plays into that narrative. If they don't believe it, then I think the state has some real issues. Do you agree with that assessment? I mean, if they buy that, and will they buy it? Because they're hinging basically all of that on that one expert, Dr. Smock, who came in there, who I thought did a good job, but I thought definitely left some doubt in his testimony.
I agree. I mean, the crux of it is, if they buy this is a staged suicide, then they're most likely going to say that the defendant staged it. I mean, that's the most likely person is always the husband. But I think there are some problems because we are lacking what we normally see, the DNA. We have a person that has a history of some mental illness. You also have this very recent suicide of his son. So, I mean, the point that was made, that why he didn't go in looking for her and that he was, afraid that he would find her like his son. I mean, that's reasonable if you've already witnessed that one time. But there's no doubt his behavior on that cam and how he was acting was odd. I mean, it was odd. There's no doubt about that. But how people process stress and grieving, everybody does that differently. So you can't really convict somebody just on that.
And you know what's interesting? We heard testimony that he's this weird kind of quirky guy. So I saw a lot of quirkiness on that video. And again, I thought the defense did a great job pointing out that, you can't judge people on how they're acting under those types of circumstances. Those are arguably the most difficult circumstances you can possibly find yourself in. You're talking to police and this person you love, is gone and you don't know where they are and things are sort of ratcheting up. So it's difficult. I want to take a listen now to the state's closing. They refer to him as Kaiser Sose. That's a popular reference, a popular culture reference. Kaiser Sose was in a movie where he's really an incredible mastermind of crime. And I want to take a listen and I want to get your thoughts.
I'd like to talk to you about a movie. There's a movie called The Usual Suspects. Came out in the mid-90s, where Kevin Spacey is the main character, and the point of the story is he's narrating or discussing events while he's sitting in a police station. Now, spoiler alert on this 30-year-old movie is that at the end of the day, it turns out that Kevin Spacey's character was the main criminal mastermind the entire time. It only becomes clear as he walks out of the police station at the end of the movie that the detective then looks and realizes that Kevin Spacey was weaving together a story based on a word that was on the bottom of a coffee cup.
He's a little bit wrong there. He was weaving a story out of a lot of different pieces from inside that room. It wasn't just the one thing on the cup. But anyway, my point being that he's calling this guy a mastermind. And as we see him sitting there, the two don't match up. I wonder if you think that was a good analogy and one that will resonate with the jury.
You know, first of all, the fact that he's trying to compare this to a movie, the jury, in closing arguments, the jury has to go through the elements of the crime. They have to see if that was bad, not whether it's a believable story or there possibly could be a movie with, you know, ending where he was guilty. But I'm not feeling it either, Michael. I'm not feeling he's a mastermind. And, you know, his demeanor, I'm really sensing that, like you said before, it's this quirky individual. And, you know, he's kind of, I'm not seeing the mastermind. I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, I'm just not. And we just saw him crying there. You know, he emoted throughout this trial. And a number of times he broke down and he would cry. And again, I guess you can find ways to go to a place where you can emote that without it being genuine. But, you know, it's difficult. And I wonder how the jury was taking that all in. I want to listen to some sound now from the defense where they got to refute this idea that he's this criminal mastermind. Let's listen.
The main criminal mastermind? And I'm going to talk about whether Matt Moore is the main criminal mastermind in a second. He takes them to the exact area and says this is where she forages, and then even the state of Ohio in their closing argument just now had to concede that, do you know what he says? You might want to go in. Oh, that's a bad fact, right? And you know why he wouldn't want to go in? Is it because he doesn't want to find her? Actually, I agree with that. You know why he doesn't want to find her? Because 10 months earlier, his son was hanging from a tree in the woods.
Alexis, do you think this is going to be a relatively quick deliberation, or do you think this jury is going to labor over this for a while?
Well, you know, as attorneys, we hate to guess on those types of things, but I'm leaning towards that it's going to be pretty short, relatively. I mean, but that was an interesting clip because she is so compelling to watch, the defense attorney. So it was so interesting in that clip that you pulled up that the prosecution was actually watching her. And that's unusual because you usually aren't going to see them making eye contact, but if you watch, they were looking up. She's a very compelling trial attorney. But also what I also caught in that clip was, you know, we saw in the body cam, he was kind of void of emotion. And now he's showing emotion. And I don't know, I'm on the fence as to how authentic that is, because it almost seemed that, you know, he had the inability to really show emotion like that. But, you know, like mentioned before, he could have been in shock when that body cam was done.
You know, I agree. When I remember seeing that body cam for the first time and thinking to myself, he's not showing emotion there. And I think part of that, during the trial when they were showing it, he was, in fact, showing some emotion. Alexis, stand by, because my understanding is that the jury, oh, there's the yellow light. The jury has a question. My understanding is that the judge is in the courtroom. And, oh, no, he's not in the courtroom as of yet. All right, they're not on the record as of yet, but what we're going to do right now, Alexis, stand by. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to find out what's going on with that question, and of course, if it's going on in open court, we're going to take you there live. So keep it right here on CourtTV, your front row seat to judge. This jury has been very inquisitive throughout this trial. Great questions. An interesting aspect of this trial, they were allowed to ask questions of each individual witness. We'll keep an eye on that. Right now, I want to bring back in my guest, federal trial attorney Alexis Rosenberg is with me. Alexis, that aspect of the case I thought was extremely interesting. This idea that the jury could ask questions of the individual witnesses once they were done with their testimony. If they had questions, they would give it to the judge. He'd ask them. I thought they were very enlightening. I thought they were important and good questions. Have you ever had a trial like that? And what do you think of that aspect of the case?
I have not had a trial like that. I mean, I think this is a jurisdictional or a state that allows them to do that. I do think it's helpful. I mean, it's also helpful to the attorneys as well, because they're able to see the issues that they have in their case that aren't being fully explained, or there's not questioning about. So I do think it is good, but I have personally not had a trial that has allowed that.
There was a tiny part of the case, and actually it's not so tiny. It's the motive part that I'm having some issues with as well. It almost seemed to me that there was a little bit of a shift by the prosecution, where initially they seemed to suggest that perhaps there was some money motive, but it was brought out on cross-examination that, this defendant, he had his own money, over $400,000, never even cashed in a life insurance policy for the victim in this case. So that went by the wayside. And then it seemed like the motive became this difficult relationship they had that may have involved some domestic violence. There certainly were some disrespectful texts going back and forth from Moore to the victim in this case. Your thoughts on the motive, and sitting here right now, having listened to some of the evidence in this case, are you clear on the motive, and do you think it's clear to the jury?
I'm not even clear on the motive, and I don't think the jury is either. I think the prosecution really dropped the ball with that. I mean, we don't have a life insurance. Usually that's forefront. The motive is that the individual is killed for the life insurance. He had his own money. I mean, it's totally lacking a motive, and the prosecution didn't really even seem to want to address that lack of motive. And I think it's going to be difficult for them to get a conviction without a reason why he allegedly killed her.
During the state's closing argument, they initially, the first thing they went after was the defense's argument that this was a suicide, before they went after what their theory was. I thought that was a bit of a mistake, because again, I felt the closing arguments were going to be very important to clarify some of the confusion. Again, a lot of disparate, different parts here that needed to be brought together. And rather than go directly into what their case was, they started off refuting this idea that this was a suicide. I wonder if you think that might have been a little bit of a mistake there.
Well, I think the prosecution missed that they have the burden. They have to prove their case. They really failed to set up not only the motive, but to set up how it was plausible. And they were just kind of hooking on mostly to the fact that his demeanor was odd. I mean, we also have the bruising on the nose issue, which is a problem for the defense, because that wasn't really explained in detail or that much detail how that could have occurred. But the prosecution, I really think, dropped the ball here.
Now, that's the other issue that I think is confusing for me as well. Initially, that seemed to be that they were arguing that those facial injuries were all a part of this assault. As a matter of fact, he's facing two different charges. He's facing murder and also felony murder, and the felonious assault being, I guess, whatever he had done to her. I think they wanted to suggest that he hit her about the head and face, and this was before strangling her, so there was the assault, and then he ended up killing her as a result. Again, I came away not 100% clear, and I guess this absolutely helps the defense, whether there were, in fact, facial injuries that happened around the time of death. There was testimony it happened long before. There was testimony that it might have happened after. I still don't know where I come down on that issue.
Yeah, they didn't show that timeline. I mean, they seem to be sticking the prosecution to this timeline, the timeline, but they're really not showing the timeline related to that. As well as, keep in mind, the therapist, the notes from that, they're not mentioning domestic violence. There's no communication with friends about domestic violence. We don't have any pictures that were introduced where there was, while she was alive, of a bruise or a black eye or something like that. The text messages, yes, there was some communication where they were fighting sometimes, but that's kind of natural with married couples, that not verbally arguing, not physically, but that wasn't even, there was no communication with her about being physically hurt.
Alexis, I'm sorry to cut you off there. All right, we've been looking at the courtroom. They're not quite back in yet. We do have to take a break. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me for this hour. Truly appreciate it. Loved your insights. We'll have you on again soon. When we come back, we got a lot more for you.